All right, for the past few weeks, we have spent a lot of time looking at love. Those of you who have been here have probably noticed the pattern. It's been all about love for a good 6 weeks now, and specifically loving God and loving people. We've spent a whole lot of time on it, and today we are officially wrapping the whole series up. But we figured that before we move on to anything else next week, it's really important that we try to summarize the main points of what we talked about these past 6 weeks. Because as we talked about a lot, it's extremely, extremely important, this stuff right here. It's not something that we can afford to miss. Maybe you've forgotten some of it along the way, or maybe you missed a couple weeks, or maybe you haven't been here at all. But either way, if there was ever a time you're going to pay really hard attention or take notes or whatever you have to do, this would be the week. Because we're going to try to summarize the whole 6 weeks this morning, this whole thing of loving God and loving people. And again, this is just hugely, hugely important. If that hasn't gotten across to you somehow, then think about it really hard until it gets across to you, because this is too good to miss, too important to miss. And really, you see that in the main verse that we use for this whole teaching. It's in Matthew chapter 22. We'll have it up there. Starting in verse 35, Jesus is teaching to a group of Jews, and it says a lawyer who's someone well-trained in the Old Testament law stood up and asked him a question, and this is going to be the basis for this whole 6 weeks you spent on love. The lawyer says to Jesus, "Teacher, what is the great commandment in the law?" And Jesus responds to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." So really important is that last line he threw in there. On these two commandments, loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself, or loving people, depend all of the law and all of the prophets. In other words, he takes the whole Old Testament system of laws, of which there were over 600, this whole system explaining to man how to live correctly, how to live well on earth, and he boils the whole thing down to two things: love God and love people. Everything that's in the law, everything that the Old Testament prophets talked about, boils down to this stuff right here: love God and love people. So the thing we've got to get, the thing we've really got to get, is if we, with our lives, are loving God, and if we, with our lives, are loving people, then we're getting the whole thing right. Everything else is just a subcategory of these two things. If we're loving God and loving people, we're getting life right. But on the flip side, and this was really important too, if we, with our lives, are not loving God and are not loving people, then it doesn't matter what else we're doing. It doesn't matter how much we read our Bible. It doesn't matter how many random good deeds we do a day. It doesn't matter that we've not missed a Sunday morning service for 10 years. If we're not loving God and not loving people, we have missed the point. So that's why we've spent so much time on this stuff, because it's just crucial. It is just crucial, not just to this bubble we want to call Christianity. It's crucial to life as a human being. We can't miss these two things. And so that's, again, that's why we've spent so much time on it. So this morning, again, we're going to spend the whole morning summarizing loving God and loving people. These 2 points. So try to get it. If you haven't gotten it yet, try to get it, because it's just huge. So again, I'm going to go into breaking down loving God, which we spent a lot of time on in weeks 3 and 4, and then we're going to loving people, which we looked at in weeks 5 and 6. Weeks 1 and 2 were kind of like an introduction. We spent a lot of time on that verse in Matthew 22 and looking at what love does at a practical level. But so this first part, loving God, we spent 2 weeks on it. We talked about how the basis of loving God is living in relationship with him. Loving God in relationship. That's the basis of this whole thing. And the basic idea that we looked at, and this is huge, if there's a main point out of week 3, it's this one. Nothing is more important than getting your relationship with God right. I'll say that one again. It's right there, by the way. Nothing is more important than getting your relationship with God right. There's nothing that should be higher on the priority list. And what's funny, I think, is in Christianity today, and in even like the past 2,000 years or so, it's been about so many other things. So many different things. It's, oh, this is what it's about. No, this is what it's about. It's all about reading your Bible. It's all about, okay, if you perform your good deed today, you're doing it right. If you can make it to church on Sunday morning, well, you're doing pretty well. But what was shocking to me when I looked and I did a study of what Jesus' focus was, what Jesus really cared about us getting right, because I figured if that's what he cares about, I should probably make that what I care about, right? And so I looked at what he cared about, and he talks about a lot of things, but you'll notice this theme is that he really seems to care about relationship more than anything else. And actually, what's interesting, 2,000 years ago, the Jews had the same problem that I think a lot of us have today, in that we make this whole life about so many different things. But for the Jews, this group called the Pharisees would spend so much time in the Scripture and so much time trying to get the law just right. And Jesus really addressed this whole issue, and I think it's very applicable today as well. He says in Matthew chapter 7 that when everything's all said and done, many will come to him and say, Lord, Lord, look at all the stuff I did for you. I cast out demons in your name. Have any of us cast out a demon? I did this in your name, Lord. And I did this. And look at all the stuff that I did. And his response isn't, wow, man, that's a lot of stuff you did. You're good. He says, depart from me. I never knew you. He doesn't say, well, you didn't meet your demon casting quota. You didn't read the whole Bible through 20 times. He says, depart from me. We never had a relationship. There was no relationship there. And that's his whole focus. And he looks at all this stuff we focus on, and he says, I don't have a relationship with you. And I think it's so crucial that we look very hard at what Christ focuses on and what God's focus is on, and then we look hard at our own lives. And if those two priorities aren't lining up, we need to do some serious rearranging. Because again, Christianity today is about so much stuff. And Christ says, I never knew you. We never had relationship. And it's crucial that we get that right. It's crucial. Because frankly speaking, and we talked about this a little bit on week 3, but simply speaking, our lives just aren't going to function the way they're designed to function unless we're walking in that relationship with the Father. Because at a base level, he created us for that relationship. And we're going to see this with loving people as well, but we're created at the deepest levels to function in love, to function in a love relationship with our Creator, and to function in love with other people. And if we're not functioning like that, if we're not living like that, our lives just aren't going to work right. And so we'll talk about that more in a moment. But that was what week 3 was all about. It was looking at priorities and where ours are and where God's is. We've got to rearrange it to get it right. And so that doesn't really mean anything. We can talk about priorities all day long, but it doesn't help us at all unless we look at it practically. Like, well, that's really nice, but what do I do on a basic level to get that up there on my priority list, to make that happen on a practical basis? So in week 4, we went into loving God practically, living relationship with God on a practical level. And so again, it has to be our priority. And there's a lot of great things we talked about in week 4. A lot of great stuff, and so much great stuff that I can't summarize all of it right now. But it all boils down to one main point. In pursuing a practical relationship with God, there's no way any of us can have a real relationship with God unless we get intentional about pursuing it. There's no way that we're going to have a real, functional, deep, full relationship with God unless we get intentional about pursuing that relationship. And that's what week 4 boils down to. And I do want to clarify, because when you talk about pursuing, it almost makes it seem like God's hiding somewhere. Like, where's he at? Marco. Like he's a rare animal and we can track him down. There he is. God's not hiding anywhere. And what's really cool to me, and this is what I love about it, this whole thing so much, if you read the Bible, the picture that it paints is of God pursuing us relentlessly and unconditionally. And it's such a cool picture. And that's over and over and over again. It shows God coming after man. But the thing about relationship is it's a two-way street. And so God can come after us all he wants. And it's not going to change anything until we get intentional about responding to his pursuit. And I think this is illustrated really best. My favorite verse in the Bible that illustrates this is actually in Revelation, chapter 3, verse 20. And this is Jesus Christ speaking. He says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him, and he with me." You see the imagery that's being used there? This very intentional imagery. The picture is of Christ standing and knocking on a door, waiting for somebody to answer it and let him in. And he says, somebody hears my voice and lets me in. I've just been waiting for that. I'll come in and I'll eat with them. He'll eat with me. We'll converse. We'll live life together. But the whole picture is God's not going to hold us down and force us into a relationship we don't want to be in. It's not how relationship works. It's not. Both sides in a relationship have to choose that relationship. It's the nature of relationship. Both sides have to choose love. And we have to respond to God's incredible pursuit until that relationship can develop. This is the way it is. And you know what's interesting, though? I feel like a lot of times we realize this. For years, I feel like I knew this. I knew that relationship with God was really important. And I knew that I had to make some effort of my own to make it happen a bit. But it seemed like I would say, I really need to do that. I've really got to make time for that. I really need to do that. And days would pass, and weeks would pass, and months would pass, and I would never seem to really make time for God in my life. Can anyone relate with that at all? Maybe it's just me. I've had a lot of trouble in the past. But for whatever reason, it seems like this culture, and even just a lot of this world, is so busy. We're so busy. We talked about this a lot in week 4, but we have such a busy society. It's almost like if you're not busy, it's like, wow, you better get busy, you lazy bum. You know what I mean? It's our culture. We're so busy, and then when we make time to not get busy, we get distracted, and then we get busy again. Well, I need to really take some time off. That looks fun. Oh, I got a phone call that needs some attending to. We get busy, and then we're not busy, we get distracted just like that. And that's, I don't know, I've dealt with it for years and years and years, and it's hard. But the simple fact is, and this is just the way it is, nothing is going to change in my relationship with God or in your relationship with God until we make time to intentionally make it happen. Until we just say, I'm going to do this and nothing is going to stop me. Because as we mentioned before, there isn't anything more important. There's nothing more important than getting that one right. And sometimes I catch myself going, I just don't have time for it. I wish I did have time for God. I don't. I'm just too busy right now. But I think the fact is, if it really is true that God and our relationship with Him is more important than anything else, then if our lives are too busy for us to make time for Him, it's probably safe to say that we're too busy and that we need to make time for the highest priority. And sometimes I catch myself, I'm just too busy. I'll make time for it next week. It's too busy right now. But somebody pointed something out to me once. They said, the general point was, you think you're so busy, but what if you got a phone call that said your son had gotten terribly injured? If I got a phone call and someone said, Ty's really hurt, you need to come now. I don't care what I'm doing. I don't care how packed my schedule is. I'm making time for my son because he's very, very high on my priority list. He's my son, right? And I think we need to look very carefully at our lives and our priorities. And if God is really the most important thing, we need to make time for it. It's not something like, that's number 7 on my list, and I really need to try to fit that in my schedule. There's nothing more important we can invest our time in. There just isn't. And what's really cool is as you make that intentional time to spend with God, it develops into a lifelong walk with God. And suddenly you're driving in your car and you're just conversing with Him and you're sharing what's going on in your life. And suddenly you find yourself with 5 minutes of free time and you're just thinking about Him. Man, he's really great, just worshiping. And it develops into a lifelong walk, but you're never going to get that depth of relationship unless you make intentional time to spend with God. Make time to get away from the noise and the buzz and the busy. Be alone with yourself and be alone with the Father. It's huge. And again, the simple fact is, I've said this a few times, but I can't emphasize it enough. There's nothing more important we can invest our time in. There just isn't. Because it's almost a trickle-down effect with the way that works. If we're spending time developing our relationship with God, which is at the root of our design, everything else in our life is going to start to straighten out. Our focus, our joy, our peace, our understanding. It's just the way it works. We were designed that way. It's like how every son needs to know his father. There's something missing. Every human being is a creation of a God who lovingly and caringly considers you on a daily basis. And it's a overused phrase, but there really is a God-shaped hole in a way. So I know I'm flying through this, but I'll summarize the summary at the end. So that was week 4. Weeks 3 and 4, we spent a lot of time talking all about loving God, why it is the highest priority, and in week 4, we said you just got to get intentional about it or it's not going to happen. With week 5, we moved into that big second part. We started with loving people, loving your neighbor as yourself, the second most important commandment of those 2 that Jesus boils the whole law down into. Loving people. The basic idea we discussed here in week 5 is that loving people, choosing intentionally to consider what is good for the other person and pursuing what is good for that other person, what is best for that person, regardless of how you feel and regardless of what they've done for you, that kind of love is always invariably better than any other way of living, any other way of dealing with people. The basic idea is that there's never a case where selfishness, hatred, anger, greed, impatience, whatever, there's never a case where those alternative ways of living produce better results than love. It just isn't. It doesn't matter how emotionally gratifying telling someone off is. Love is always better. It's always superior. And that is the nature of the way we work. Just like God created us to live in relationship with Him, He created us to love each other. And it works, that's part of our design. Just like a car was designed to run off of gasoline, we are designed to love each other, and that's how we work best. And I know it sounds kind of hippie-ish. Love makes the world go round, brother. But it's really, on a realistic level, on a basic level, it's true, and I think we all get it. Just for a second, do me a favor, and think about a person in your life that at one point or for a period of time or whatever just loved you. Just loved you unconditionally, considered you, pursued what was best for you regardless of what you did to them or what was going on in their life, just loved you. How wonderful are people like that? I mean, do any of us think of people like that and go, that jerk, how dare he love me? I mean, they're wonderful, right? People like that are great. And what's really interesting to me is even in like the secular whatever, the secular world, people who love are appreciated and respected and looked upon highly. People who love other people are like, you know what, I don't believe in the concept of good, but you're all right. It's just something that fascinates me. I'll be on the internet full of cynics, and they'll see, someone will post a picture of someone doing a good deed, and they'll be like, okay, that's pretty good. I could get behind that. Because it's just great. It works better. And what's really cool, I don't know if you've experienced this in your own life or seen it somewhere, but when two people mutually love each other, mutually pursue each other's best, consider each other in all their decisions, when two people have that kind of mutual love, it's incredible, it's amazing. I think that's a glimpse of heaven. That's a glimpse of the real heart of what we were designed to live in all the time with everybody, everywhere. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what it would look like if everyone in this room loved everyone else in this room constantly, unconditionally? This would be a room of incredible world changers. I can only imagine how effective I would be if I could get it to the point where I loved consistently and regardless of how I felt. I'm working there, but I mess up. It's so much better than any other way of doing things. It just is. And I feel like when we get like a taste of it, when we get a glimpse of what that lifestyle looks like, anything else just tastes putrid, dirty, so much less. It's like having your first taste of cheesecake when all you've been eating is fruitcake. Maybe you like fruitcake, I'm sorry. I just really like cheesecake. It's so much better. It's so much better. Dysfunction starts disappearing. Relationships start working at a base level. And so all this is really nice. It's very nice and flowery and feel good. But when it gets down to the nitty-gritty, it gets pretty tough. It just is. It's not easy to love in the face of not love. Not easy to love in the face of impatience or persecution or selfishness. It's really difficult. You'll find, though, that anger perpetuates anger. Selfishness perpetuates selfishness. It's like a terrible fungus. Fungi. And so, with all this we're talking about, there's a question that ends up coming up because Jesus' first statement was, love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. There's a question that came up when he taught this that we went into a lot in week 6, last week. And the question that a lawyer poses, well, who is my neighbor? It's great to say that I need to love my neighbor, but who falls into that category of people that I need to love? Who are those people? Who are my neighbors? And what we looked at a lot last week was Jesus' response to that question, and it was really incredible. And there's a whole lot of fascinating details that go into it, a lot of historical stuff. It's really great, my favorite kind of stuff. If you weren't here last week, I really I encourage you to check it out on YouTube. But ultimately, what Jesus does is he takes the question, who is my neighbor? Who falls into that category of people that I must love? And he rejects it. He throws the question out entirely. And instead, he leaves the question, to whom will you be a neighbor? In other words, this whole idea of who are these people that I must love, he throws it out and he said, who are you going to love? Because for Jesus, it's not about who falls into that special category of those who you have to love. It's about loving outside of every boundary society has built. Because the fact is, and this is powerful when we get this concept, the fact is that God created us to be a neighbor to every single other person you come in contact with. And that's a challenging reality, but it's true. Because there is no question in Jesus' mind of who falls into the category of neighbor. There's nobody who doesn't. It's not even a matter of who is your neighbor. It's a matter of who are you going to prove to be a neighbor to. And so, Jesus leaves us with a really difficult challenge. Because we have to look very carefully at our lives and ask ourselves, who am I not loving? That's the question he leaves us with. Who am I not loving in my life? Because, I mean, like we said, it's very easy to love those who love us. It's almost natural. It's easy. It's not almost natural, it is natural. But again, those who hate us, those who are unreasonable, those who are cruel, who are just mean-spirited, impatient, really difficult to love. It can be really, really hard. And what Jesus does is he says in Matthew chapter 5, he says, of course you love your friend, but I tell you to love your enemy. Of course you love those who love you, but I tell you to go outside that boundary and love those who hate you, love those who persecute you. Love the people that you really dislike, that don't deserve your love. Love those people. And the point he's making is it's that kind of love that breaks walls down. It's that kind of love that tears down defenses, that heals, that brings the kind of function and fullness and goodness in relationship we were designed to have. And that is huge. And Jesus plops down this massive challenge in front of us, but it's so crucial that we take it up. He says, look at your life and begin to intentionally love the people in it. Consider your family, consider your friends, consider your coworkers, consider the people you walk by in the Walmart aisle, and start loving them. Because reasonably speaking, it's not an option to not. You're perpetuating the destruction that the world has found itself in at this point in history. Love is too big to miss. And so that was week 6. And here we are in week 7 summarizing our series. And so I know that was a lot of information. I know we sped through all that, and your mind is possibly spinning and going, what am I going to do with this massive clump of words he threw at me? So what I'm going to do, like I said, is I'm going to summarize our summary in a way that is very practical. So if you got nothing else, get this for when you go home and pick your life back up. Number 1, for loving God, The challenge that Jesus Christ leaves us with is that when we walk out of this building, when we go home, and this is a challenge to me and a challenge to everyone here, when we go home, when you go home, intentionally spend time with the God who lovingly created you and desperately desires relationship with you. Get intentional. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Because it's not going to happen unless you make it. Spend time getting to know your Creator. Spend time just talking with Him, talking to Him. It'll probably feel awkward for a little while. But eventually it develops into the most natural thing you'll ever do. Just live your life with Him. That's the whole thing, is to get intentional. We can't just let it float on anymore and leave it somewhere dangling on our priority list. We've got to get it to the top because, again, there's nothing more important we can invest our time in. Just today, I challenge all of us just to take 15 minutes out of our busy, busy day to spend time with our God. Just 15 minutes for today. Can we try to do that? I'm going to try to do that. So that was number one. Number one of Jesus' 2 points that the whole law boils down into. And number two, when you leave here, when you go home, sit down for a few minutes and think about your family. Think about your spouse. Think about your friends, your coworkers, the people who are in your life. And commit yourself to getting intentional about loving those people. Just decide, I'm going to love them regardless of how I'm feeling, whatever day. Regardless of what they do to me, I'm going to love them. Even when they don't deserve it. Even when you're in a bad mood. Because again, the fact of the matter is, it is so much better than any other way to live with people. So much better than telling them off. So much better than losing your cool. So much better than shunning them. Love is just infinitely superior because it's at the base level part of our design. And I promise things are going to start kinking themselves out. Dysfunction is going to start to disappear. Walls are going to start breaking down because love is the natural remedy. I'm convinced that if everybody loved each other, there wouldn't be any need for psychologists or therapy. Because things would just start working. So the challenge there, number two, is go home and get intentional about loving the people in your life. And maybe there's only 3 people that you really need to say, I need to love these people. Maybe it's 20, maybe it's 50. However many it is, sit down and think, I am going to love them. And it's going to be really easy to forget what your commitment was as soon as you get up in their face again. But tomorrow, do it again. I'm going to do it. The next day, I'm going to do it because it's so much better. It's so much better. So we're going to have the band come up as we finish up here. I'm going to go ahead and pray to close us out. But even as I pray right now, start thinking in your mind and making plans to make these 2 things happen. Getting intentional about spending time with your God and getting intentional about loving the people in your life. Because this stuff is too important to miss. It is too important to miss. It's not just a Christian thing. It's a matter of being a human being. So, Father, thank you that you haven't just left us on this earth with no idea how to live, that you've told us very clearly that this is how we are to live if we want to function and live well. But it's hard, God, because we're so busy, and it's hard because it's become so natural to respond with selfishness or with a sharp tongue. So please help us, Father. Please help us, Holy Spirit, on a daily level when we go home today, when we wake up tomorrow. Help us to get relationship with you at the top of our priority list and to make it happen. Help us to look at our lives and the people in them and to start loving them. Help our lives to line up more and more with the way you designed them to work. Love you, Father.